I used to believe that silence was the safest place to live. Years in Navy intelligence taught me that saying nothing often keeps you alive. But on that morning in April 2024 at Miami Executive Airport, silence was the very thing that made my stepfather underestimate me for the last time. The day began with the kind of bright Florida heat that sticks to your skin. I had agreed reluctantly to accompany my mother and Charles Whitford on his private jet. He wanted to fly to Tampa to sign a real estate deal worth millions. My mother thought the trip would ease the tension between us. She was wrong. Charles never passed up a moment to parade his wealth or belittle anything he could not control, especially me. He walked ahead of us with his usual arrogant confidence, his tailored shirt open at the collar, silver watch catching the sun. He turned back only to smirk. "You know, Talia, he said some people earn their way into luxury. Others just tag along." My mother stiffened beside me as if the words hit her ribs. I kept walking. Years of breathing through pressure chambers and classified briefings had made insults feel light, almost weightless. But not today. Today, the air felt charged, waiting. When we reached the stairs leading into the Gulfstream G700, a machine so polished it reflected the sky like a mirror, the pilot stood at the doorway with a tablet in his hand. "Morning, folks. I just need your IDs for the manifest." Charles laughed as if the idea offended him. "What for?" He pointed at me. "She is with us. She does not need anything." The pilot gave a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Everyone needs ID, sir. It is standard protocol." Charles sighed dramatically, reached into his wallet, handed over his card, and gestured at my mother. When the pilot finally turned to me, Charles crossed his arms. "This should be quick," he muttered. "She barely exists in any system." I handed my ID to the pilot without looking at Charles. The tablet beeped once, then again. The soft digital tone shifted into something deeper and colder, and the screen flashed red. The pilot froze. His posture changed almost instantly. He tapped the alert. A message spread across the display. "Alert Admiral Ghost Maximum Protocol." The world tightened around us. The pilot straightened his spine until it was perfectly aligned. His voice dropped as if the air itself demanded respect. "Ma'am?" He stepped back from the doorway. "Admiral Ghost, your escort is on standby." Charles blinked slowly as if his brain could not translate English anymore. "Admiral what? Escort who?" He barked out a laugh that cracked in the middle. "Are you joking? What kind of name is that?" The pilot ignored him completely. He looked past us toward the runway. I followed his line of sight. 2 F-35 Lightning II fighters were rolling out from a hangar at Eglin Air Force Base, their engines humming like thunder buried under the tarmac. Even from a distance, the heat shimmer rippling around them gave the moment a surreal glow. My mother gasped and grabbed my arm. "Talia, what is happening?" Charles spun toward me, color draining from his face. "What did you do? Why are they here?" I kept my voice even the same tone I used in briefing rooms thousands of miles from home. "Let the protocol run." The pilot lowered his head slightly. "We are awaiting further instructions, ma'am." Charles moved in front of me as if blocking me would stop the world from shifting beneath him. "This is ridiculous. You think you are someone important? You think this is real?" The tablet chimed again. A second alert. The pilot read it and his breath hitched. "Ma'am, NORAD has acknowledged your presence. They request confirmation of Protocol Echo 7. The words cracked through the air like a signal flare. My mother's hand trembled in mine. Charles shook his head, disbelief bending his features. He looked small for the first time in his life. "How did we not know?" he whispered. "After everything, how did we not know who you are?" I finally looked at him fully, not with anger, not with pride, just with a steady calm forged from years of being unseen. "You never asked." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger in his own family. The F-35s approached the taxiway, their silhouettes sharp against the Florida sun. The ground crew paused to watch the sight. Several people stepped out of the terminal curious. A private jet receiving fighter escort was not something anyone ignored. My mother clutched her chest. Charles whispered again this time, his voice hollow and thin. "My God! What are you, Talia?" The roar of the engines rose until it vibrated through the metal stairs beneath our feet. I met his eyes and answered with the same steady tone. Just someone you should not have mocked. Then the engines surged, the protocol activated, and nothing in our family would ever be the same. My name is Talia Greer, and for most of my life I learned to survive by becoming small. Not weak. Never weak. Just quiet enough to escape the kind of attention that bruises deeper than a fist. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida in the spring of 1990, back when my mother still smiled easily and my father was still around. Their marriage did not last long. By the time I was 12, the good moments had thinned into memories, and the bad ones came knocking too often. When the divorce finally landed, my mother packed what we could fit into her old sedan and tried to rebuild a life that kept slipping out of reach. 3 years later, she met Charles Whitford, a man who walked like he owned every street he stepped on. When they married, I was 15 and already old enough to understand that being brought into his household did not mean being welcomed. Charles never raised his voice at me. He never had to. His disdain came through in smaller, measured ways that cut sharper than shouting. The way he looked past me at dinner. The way he corrected my posture like I was an employee. The way he once said in a calm, even tone that stuck with me for years, "You are not my daughter, and I do not owe you respect." My mother tried to bridge the distance, but she feared conflict, and Charles knew it. He used silence like a weapon, and she folded under it. I learned early that the safest place in that house was behind my own closed door. At 18, I made a choice that no one saw coming. I enlisted in the United States Navy. I did not tell my stepfather until the papers were already signed. He barely looked up from his coffee. "Some kids run away," he said. "Some pick uniform as a shortcut in life. You do what you want." Then he turned the page of his financial newspaper, and I realized something important. He expected me to fail. That expectation became my fuel. The Navy sent me to Pensacola for initial training, and it was there that someone noticed what Charles never bothered to see. I was calm under pressure with a mind that could assemble fragments of information faster than most. Within a year, I was moved into an intelligence track. By 22, I was assigned as a liaison within Joint Special Operations Command. My job was to bridge the gaps between teams that rarely spoke the same operational language. I lived inside encrypted channels and dim briefing rooms, moving between Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, and the intelligence community like a shadow. The work was quiet, invisible on purpose. Lives depended on it. That was when I received the designation that would follow me for the rest of my career, Admiral Ghost. Ghost classified identity used during high-risk transfers or international crisis travel. Admiral priority level within protocol systems, not a rank, not a title, but a warning to agencies that certain procedures must activate the moment I appeared in a database. The code was never meant to be spoken aloud by anyone outside the chain of command. Certainly not by a civilian pilot on a sunny Florida morning. I carried the name for more than a decade along with the stories I could never tell. In 2019, during a deployment-linked operation, one of my closest teammates did not make it home. The loss carved something out of me that never grew back. A year later, at 33, I stepped out of the military and tried to fold myself back into a life that felt too quiet and too loud at the same time. Charles never asked about my service. My mother asked gently, but I answered softly and briefly because the truth was heavy and she had carried more than enough in her own life. To both of them, I was just Talia again, the quiet girl who blended into the walls. And I let them believe that. It was easier than explaining the world I had walked in. Easier than reliving it. Until the morning, the system recognized me before they ever did. If someone had asked me years ago why I tolerated Charles, the answer would have been simple. My mother. She spent most of her adulthood trying to hold together pieces of a life that other people kept breaking. By the time she married Charles, she was exhausted and vulnerable, and he knew exactly how to shape himself into the kind of man she believed she needed. He provided stability, at least on the surface. He paid the bills without complaint, took her to dinners at places she had only seen on television, and surrounded her with people who dressed like every decision they made was endorsed by a financial advisor. But behind closed doors, Charles controlled everything from the color of the furniture to the size of my mother's credit card limit. He presented it as care. He called it protection. In reality, it was a leash disguised as generosity. He handled the mortgage, the accounts, the insurance, and even the passwords. My mother once joked that she could not buy a carton of milk without him knowing. She laughed, but I did not miss the edge in her tone. His manipulation was subtle but consistent. When she disagreed with him, he sighed deeply and said, "You know I make the decisions because I am the one who understands these things." When she hesitated to accompany him to business events, he reminded her how lucky she was to have a husband who provided so well. When she worried about me, he said she is grown, let her figure out her life. The cruelty came wrapped in politeness. That made it harder for her to push back, and she did not. She feared what would happen if she did. She had been alone before, and loneliness had teeth. Charles used that fear like a pressure point. As for me, he never cared enough to hide his disdain. The morning of the flight, he announced in his usual clipped tone that he would be taking us to Tampa, where he planned to close a $280 million real estate deal. He said it with the casual arrogance of someone talking about picking up dry cleaning. Then he added, "And I suppose Talia can come along. Might as well let her see how people with ambition live." My mother shot him a warning look, but he shrugged it off. He always did. To him, my career in the Navy was a punchline. He had once told a group of his golfing buddies that military service was what people chose when they had run out of real options. He never apologized for the comment, even after he realized I had heard it. That was Charles. He did not raise his voice. He lowered your worth. On that morning, I said nothing. I had learned long ago that every confrontation with him only caused more pain for my mother. She would be the one who paid for it later, not with bruises, but with silence, guilt, and coldness that seeped into the walls for days. She stood between us in the driveway, adjusting the strap of her purse, while her eyes flicked nervously between our faces. There was always a flicker of fear in her when she thought tension might rise. She hated conflict in the way some people hated fire because it burned her once and she never forgot the heat. "You do not have to come if it is uncomfortable," she whispered. Her voice was soft, hopeful, almost pleading. She wanted peace more than she wanted truth. But she also wanted me close. I knew that. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "I am fine, Mom. It is only a short trip." Charles looked at his watch pointedly. "Let us not drag this out. I have a contract to finalize, and I prefer to travel with people who are punctual." He walked to the SUV without waiting for a reply. My mother followed him quickly as if distance alone might upset him. I walked behind them steady and silent. I had spent years navigating war rooms and intelligence briefings, yet somehow this household felt like the most fragile terrain I had ever crossed. The truth was simple. I endured him to protect her. If that meant biting my tongue and sitting through his monologues about wealth and legacy and power, then so be it. I could shoulder that weight. I had carried heavier. I knew what he wanted from this trip. He wanted to use luxury as a weapon to show me the gap between his world and mine. He wanted to remind me that in his eyes I did not belong. But he had no idea how small his world really was. Not compared to the one I had walked in. Not compared to what waited for him on that runway. The first alert on the pilot's tablet had rattled the air, but what happened next was the true spark that split my past from my present. The pilot stepped back into the cockpit for secondary verification. His voice dropped into a clipped professional cadence as he spoke into the radio. The door was not fully closed. I heard the confirmation come in through static. "NORAD acknowledges Admiral Ghost. Stand by for formation protocol." My mother froze. Charles scoffed loudly as if the entire airport were conspiring to inconvenience him. "Oh, for heaven's sake! These systems glitch all the time." He waved a dismissive hand toward the cockpit. "You would think with the amount of money I pay for this thing they would fix the software." The pilot returned pale but composed. "Sir." "Ma'am." "We have received a standby notification. We are instructed not to depart until further coordination is complete." Charles let out a sharp laugh. "Coordination ridiculous!" He jabbed a finger at me. Whatever she did must have confused the system. Probably her outdated military ID. He turned toward the pilot. "Run it again!" The pilot swallowed. "Sir, it has already been run 3 times. The results are identical." He hesitated before finishing in a lower voice. "They never request standby unless the designation is verified." Charles rolled his eyes with theatrical frustration. Verified my foot. She could not verify a library card. This is absurd. My mother shot him a quiet warning breath, but he ignored her. He always ignored her. And then the sound hit. A deep, controlled rumble that did not belong to any civilian aircraft. It vibrated through the metal stairs and the soles of our shoes. Charles frowned and glanced toward the runway. What now? He muttered. Another glitch, I suppose. But it was not a glitch. The first F-35 appeared like a blade slicing through heat shimmer. Sleek, dark, angular. The kind of aircraft no civilian mistake could ever explain away. The second rolled into view seconds later. Both slowed in perfect sync not far from where our jet waited. Ground crew stopped working. Several staff members inside the terminal pressed their faces to the windows. People knew what they were seeing. Fighter escort did not happen without reason. Charles staggered backward a step, his face drained of color. That has nothing to do with us. It cannot. They do not just appear. He turned to me, eyes narrowing in wild confusion. Tell them to go away. Stop whatever this is. I kept my voice steady. I cannot tell them to go anywhere. They are following protocol. Protocol, he snapped. What protocol? The pilot answered for me in a quiet, reverent tone. Protocol Echo 7, sir. It only triggers for one designation. His eyes shifted toward me with the same respect I saw on battlefields and briefing floors where lives hung in the balance. Ma'am, we need verbal confirmation to proceed. My mother's breath trembled. Charles stared at me like he had never seen me before, like I was no longer the girl he believed he could diminish. I inhaled once, steady, deliberate. Protocol Echo 7 confirmed. The words moved through the air like a key turning inside a locked door. The pilot saluted instinctively. The engines of the F-35s roared to life, and in that moment, Charles finally realized the truth was not glitching. The truth was standing right in front of him. The pilot stepped closer to us with a controlled urgency that told me he was balancing protocol with the shock of realizing who he was addressing. Ma'am, he said, I am requesting authorization to initiate shadow formation for departure. That phrase alone made the air tighten. Shadow formation was not standard escort. It was a protective maneuver reserved for assets whose identities required layers of shielding, even during domestic travel. Charles blinked rapidly as if the words themselves were foreign. Shadow what? What does that even mean? Why would we need anything like that? The pilot kept his eyes on me, awaiting the only voice in the area that could grant permission. Charles, however, swung toward me with growing panic. Talia, answer him. Tell him to stop this nonsense. Tell him this is not about you. This is some kind of mix-up. The confusion in his voice had begun to curdle into fear, the kind of fear reserved for moments when the ground stops behaving like ground. I did not answer immediately. I simply held the pilot's gaze long enough for him to understand I needed a second. He nodded slightly, stepping back, but remaining still as a soldier at attention. My mother looked between us, her face drawn tight, not only with fear, but with a dawning recognition that she was seeing something she had never been allowed to see, something I had never allowed myself to show. Charles's voice began to crack around the edges. Tell me right now what is happening. Why are fighter jets here? Why is that man calling you some kind of code name? What exactly are you? He pointed at me with a shaking hand. And why did you never tell us? Just who do you think you are? I could have answered, but silence often reveals more than words. I let the question hang, letting him hear the emptiness between his assumptions and the truth. My mother stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for my arm. Talia, sweetheart, is this because of your service? Her voice quivered. You used to come home tired in ways I could not understand. There were nights you would sit at the kitchen table staring at nothing, and when I asked if you were all right, you said you were just thinking. She swallowed. I thought it was stress. I thought you were hiding pain. But I never imagined you were hiding danger. Her eyes glistened as though pieces of every memory she had of me were rearranging themselves into a shape she had never recognized. Charles shook his head vehemently. No, this cannot be right. She worked in an office. She did paperwork. She was in intelligence, but never the important kind. Not the kind that gets fighter jets scrambled. He stared at me with a stunned anger as if my existence had betrayed the story he had written for me. You are not that important. You cannot be. You would have said something. People who have power brag about it. You never bragged. I breathed in deeply, steadying myself. Some service requires silence. That was all I said. The pilot cleared his throat quietly, reminding us he was still waiting. Ma'am, confirm shadow formation request. Charles laughed, but it was hollow and jagged. You are not actually considering approving this. Are you? This is absurd. Think about how insane this looks. Think about how people will talk. My mother turned toward him slowly. Charles, stop. Her voice did not shake this time. It had weight to it, a weight I had not heard in years. She looked at me with something like grief mixed with pride. All these years, she whispered, you carried things I never saw. Things you never told me because you thought I could not handle them. Talia, why did you never say anything? I met her eyes gently, because saying it out loud would have made it real, and because it would have made you worry. The truth rippled through her. She covered her mouth, breathing unsteadily. Charles staggered backward until he hit the cabin wall, his bravado dissolving. He whispered again, but softer. Just tell me it is a mistake. Tell me you did not hide an entire life from us. Tell me this is not about you. Tell me this has nothing to do with that name. Admiral Ghost. I finally glanced at the pilot, then nodded once. Shadow formation approved. He saluted sharply and hurried to the cockpit. The engines powered up with a roar. The fighter jets adjusted position. My mother pressed a hand to her heart, as if steadying herself against a truth that had been waiting years to surface. Charles stared at me with a face full of disbelief and terror because he was finally starting to understand. The girl he spent 20 years underestimating was someone he never had the right to judge. The jet had barely begun its taxi when the cockpit door cracked open again. The pilot's expression had shifted from tense respect to something closer to awe. Ma'am, we have incoming communication for you. Direct line from the Naval Security Coordination Center in Pensacola. My mother clutched the armrest. Charles pressed himself into the leather seat as if distance alone might protect him from whatever came next. The pilot continued, they are requesting your destination so they can coordinate ground team placement upon arrival. The words hung in the air like a dropped anchor. Ground team. My mother's eyes widened. Charles's mouth fell open. Then his face contorted as the meaning reached him. Ground team. For her, his voice cracked at the end. For her, the pilot did not bother to respond. He already knew the answer. Charles slammed his palm against the armrest. This is insane. You do not get ground teams. Presidents get ground teams. Generals get ground teams. Important people get ground teams. Not her. Not someone who never even made rank. What in the world did you do? Talia, I kept my breathing measured. Years of intelligence work had taught me how to let panic slide past rather than into me. I turned toward the pilot. Patch it through. The pilot nodded and retreated. Seconds later, a voice came through the overhead speakers, crisp, commanding, and unmistakably military. Naval Security Coordination Center, Pensacola. This is Officer Reyes, verifying Admiral Ghost is on board Gulfstream Registry 571. Confirm. I spoke clearly. Confirmed. Officer Reyes continued. We are tracking your course toward Tampa. Please advise if you require escort on final descent. Ground teams are positioned and standing by for rapid perimeter control. Charles made a strangled noise. Perimeter control echoed like a man drowning. For her. The pilot waited for my instruction. My mother's hands trembled in her lap, but her eyes never left my face. She was searching every quiet memory she had of me for clues she never noticed. I exhaled slowly. This was muscle memory, the tone, the decisiveness, the cadence of someone who had moved assets and teams across dangerous borders without ever leaving a name behind. Stand them down, I said. Officer Reyes replied, Ma'am, please confirm. Stand them down, I repeated. I am off duty. The line paused. Understood, Admiral Ghost. Ground teams are disengaging. We remain at 30-second alert if needed. The channel cut and silence filled the cabin. My mother looked at me with a mixture of aching pride and fear, but the fear was not of me. It was for all the years she never knew her daughter was walking through a different world entirely. Charles, however, stared as if seeing a stranger in his own family. His voice came out small for a man who built towers across Florida. They send ground teams for you. Ground teams. He repeated the phrase as if saying it twice might change it. His throat bobbed. You were a liaison. You worked behind a desk. No liaison gets this kind of response. What exactly were you doing all those years, Talia? What kind of job gets this level of protocol? My answer was silence, not avoidance. Protection. Some truths were built to stay buried. Charles leaned forward, gripping his knees. His voice broke. My God, all this time I thought you were nothing. Nothing. He whispered the last word like an echo of his past cruelty. The engines deepened as the jet prepared for takeoff. The F-35s adjusted position, one sliding ahead, one falling back. My mother reached for my hand. Her voice was soft shaking. Why did you never tell me who you really were? I squeezed her fingers gently. Because, Mom, if I told you everything, you would have spent every night waiting for the phone to ring. Her eyes filled with tears. Charles turned away, pressing a hand to his forehead, trying to process a truth too large for his ego to absorb. For the first time in 20 years, he finally understood the scale of the person he had underestimated, and it terrified him. We were 20 minutes into the climb when the first chime sounded through the cabin. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the hum of the engines. The second chime, however, cut through the air with a sharper edge. The pilot opened the cockpit door, his expression tight with controlled urgency. Ma'am, we have a situation. NORAD is requesting your assistance. My mother stiffened. Charles looked up slowly, as if afraid the next words might collapse the world he knew. Situation, I asked. He swallowed. A civilian aircraft, small twin-engine charter. They are flying over southern Georgia and reporting multiple instrument failures. They lost primary navigation. Partial electrical loss. They are asking for guidance from any aircraft in the vicinity with advanced comm capability or military escort. He hesitated. NORAD specifically asked for you. The air inside the cabin shifted heavier, sharper. I unbuckled my seatbelt without hesitation. My mother reached for my arm. Talia, wait. Is it dangerous? I pressed her hand gently. Not for us, but for them. Charles stood abruptly, nearly stumbling. You cannot be serious. You are not going up there to play hero. Let the professionals handle it. I met his eyes calmly. They asked because I have done this before. He blinked as if struck. Done what before? But I was already past him. The cockpit smelled like metal warm electronics and the faint trace of burnt ozone. The CO pilot glanced at me with a mixture of tension and relief. Ma'am, they are on emergency channel 19, transmitting through degraded comm. Signal is weak. They are losing altitude guidance. I slid into the jump seat, leaning toward the radio panel. Patch them through. The pilot flipped a switch. Static crackled, then a trembling voice bled into the cockpit. Charter 79. Delta to any aircraft on frequency. We have lost primary instruments. Autopilot offline. Engine readouts unstable. Requesting assistance. I pressed the transmitter. 79. Delta, this is advisory support. Do you read me? The voice trembled. Barely. We are trying. Controls are lagging. Altimeter is unreliable. Airspeed flickering. Please, please, advise. The CO pilot whispered, They are panicking. I steadied my tone. What functions do you still have? 7-9. Delta responded ragged. Horizon indicator unreliable. Compass intermittent. Manual control responsive but drifting. Engine temperature holding for now. I nodded slowly, calculating. This was not the worst-case scenario, but they were minutes away from making it one. 7-9 Delta. Listen to my voice. You are not falling. You are flying blind, but still flying. I need you to breathe. Long breath. Hold. Release. I paused, waiting. Copy came through with a shaky exhale. Good. Now do not fight the aircraft. Let it settle. Your pitch is drifting downward. Ease the yoke to neutral, not back to climb. Slight pressure, not force. The CO pilot watched me wide-eyed. The pilot kept the jet steady matching pace with the fighter escort as they coordinated spacing with ATC. 79 Delta said adjusting. Adjusting. I think it is holding. Barely. You are doing fine, I said. Focus on feeling the aircraft, not the numbers. Numbers are lying to you. Your instincts will not. Their breathing evened. Charles had appeared at the cockpit doorway, gripping the frame with white knuckles. He looked at me like he had never seen my face before, never seen my posture, never heard my voice speak with such command. The pilot gestured toward the window. Ma'am, one of the F-35s is repositioning to provide visual reference for 79 Delta. Outside, the fighter slid into a lower arc, its wingtip tilting in deliberate guidance. I keyed the transmitter again. 79 Delta. Do you see the aircraft below your right wing? The voice came back steadier. Yes. Yes, ma'am. I see it. Good. Maintain visual. Match its angle, not its altitude. Use it as your horizon. The voice cracked, but in relief. Copy. Matching. The cabin behind me had fallen completely silent except for my mother's muffled breath and Charles's rigid stance. His expression had changed from confusion to disbelief and something else respect mixed with fear. Minutes passed, the longest kind of minutes, the ones where life balances on precision and calm. 7-9. Delta report, I said. Instruments coming back online, ma'am. Not all, but enough. Pressure readings stable. Autopilot still dead, but control feels normalizing. A wave of emotion moved through the cockpit, though no one dared exhale too loudly. Good. You will maintain visual with the escort until cleared for independent navigation. Affirm, ma'am. And then, after a shaky pause, God bless you. I set the headset down. The pilot let out a long breath. Ma'am, if you ever want a job in civilian aviation, you would own the industry. I allowed a thin smile. I am better in the shadows. When I stepped back into the cabin, my mother was standing with both hands over her heart, her eyes wet. Charles, however, looked as if the world had pulled the rug from under him. His voice trembled. You sounded like a commander, like someone used to giving life and death instructions. I sat down calmly. When people are afraid, they need a steady voice. That is all. He shook his head slowly, unable to reconcile the woman he mocked for years with the one who had just guided a failing aircraft back to stability mid-air. You saved them, he whispered. You actually saved them. I corrected gently. I guided them. They did the flying. But the truth was written across his face. Everything he thought he knew about me had shattered in that cockpit, and the pieces of that realization cut deeper than any insult he ever threw my way. Charles had never looked small before. Not once. Not even in the moments when life pressed against him. He moved through the world like a man carved from marble, convinced that money, authority, and age granted him a permanent place above everyone else. But now, as the engines hummed and the jet leveled back into smooth air, he stood there shaking. His hand braced against the leather seat, his breathing uneven, his eyes darting between me and the cockpit as if replaying what he had just witnessed over and over again. Finally, he swallowed hard and forced out a whisper. Thank you. The words trembled more than his hands. For helping them. For whatever you just did in there. I looked up calmly. You are welcome. A simple acknowledgement, nothing more. But the simplicity rattled him because he expected triumph or pride, or at least the satisfaction of proving him wrong. Instead, I gave him nothing except steadiness and silence. And silence was the one thing he never knew how to fight. He straightened suddenly, as if remembering he was supposed to be the dominant voice in every room. He cleared his throat loudly. Well, yes, of course, but let us not exaggerate things. You gave instructions. It is not as if you landed the plane yourself. He forced a shaky chuckle, his attempt to reclaim even a shred of superiority, but his voice cracked mid-sentence and even he heard it. My mother watched him with a look I had never seen from her directed at him. Disbelief, disappointment, recognition. She had lived 20 years under his shadow, and for the first time the shadow was lifting, revealing the shape of the man beneath it. And she did not like what she saw. Charles continued fumbling for control. I mean, really now. Fighter jets following us. NORAD calling you directly. And all this talk about protocols. His voice sharpened weakly. Surely you are making more of this than it is. Surely there is an explanation that does not involve you being some kind of important figure. My mother turned sharply toward him. Charles, enough. Her voice did not tremble. It held a firmness that surprised even her. He blinked at her, stunned. What? She took a breath, steady and deliberate. Enough. I have watched you talk down to her for years. Belittle her. Treat her as if she were lucky to breathe the same air. And she never once pushed back, never once defended herself. Because she respected you. Because she respected me. But she never deserved the things you said. My throat tightened slightly, but I stayed silent. Charles sputtered. I was only being honest. She was never straightforward with us. She never told us who she was. My mother's eyes filled, but not with fear, with clarity. She never told us because she was protecting us, and you mistook her silence for weakness. Charles staggered back as if struck. His gaze flicked to me again, but this time it held no arrogance. Only confusion and something painfully close to shame. I could see the cracks forming. The man who had always believed he held the highest ground was suddenly standing on a fault line widening beneath him, and he knew it. My mother moved closer to me instinctively. A silent declaration, a shift in loyalty, a choice. Charles saw it too. And that was the moment everything began to collapse for him. The cabin had gone quiet again, not the uneasy silence from earlier, but a deeper one, the kind that settles when truths begin to surface whether you want them to or not. Charles sat rigid across from me, still trying to regain his footing. My mother sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm, as if afraid that if she let go for even a second, she might lose the chance to finally understand the daughter she thought she already knew. I had kept my past locked behind walls so thick even I struggled to look at them sometimes. But something about the crisis we had just survived hung in the air like a weight, and I could see the question rising in both of their eyes. Not curiosity, not accusation, just a need to understand what shaped me into the person who could guide a failing aircraft with nothing but her voice. I exhaled slowly. There is a reason I never talked about my time in the Navy. My mother nodded gently, her eyes softening. I know, sweetheart. You always said it was complicated. But complicated is not the same as unreachable. I glanced toward the window where one of the F-35s drifted like a silent guardian. Then I began. In 2019, I was assigned to a liaison role for a joint operation in the Middle East. Nothing dramatic, not like the movies, nothing that would ever make it into the news. Just small movements, communications, troubleshooting, shuttle coordination between teams. We were working with a special operations unit that had been running intel checkpoints along a narrow corridor between transport sites. My job was never frontline. I was the voice behind the scenes, the one smoothing out gaps, making sure people got in and out safely. That was what they told me anyway. Charles leaned forward slightly but said nothing. My mother squeezed my arm. But then one morning, I continued something changed. One of the teams missed their scheduled comm check. That happened sometimes, dust storms, equipment lag, basic chaos. But something felt wrong. I kept calling for them on encrypted channels. Nothing. Not static. Not interference. Just absence. And absence in our world is louder than any alarm. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. One of the younger operators had been on the team. His name was Brenner. He was 26. Fresh-faced, always joking. He used to bring extra coffee packets to the briefing room because he knew I ran on caffeine more than sleep. He would toss them to me and say Admiral Ghost runs on miracles and instant coffee. It made me laugh every time. Charles looked startled. He had never imagined me laughing with anyone in uniform. Hours passed. Then the call came in. Not from the team. From overhead surveillance. There had been an incident. A vehicle malfunction. A trap hidden in a dirt road, disguised so well even experienced patrols could miss it. The details blurred in my memory like a photograph left too long in the sun. What mattered was simple. They did not come back. I paused. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice even. I was the one who had to write the initial report. I was the one who had to notify the next chain of command. I was the one people looked at when they needed answers, even though I was not the one behind the wheel, even though I was not the one on the ground, even though I was not the one who set the trap. But that is how liaison work feels. Everything is your responsibility, and none of it is under your control. My mother's tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. I had never seen her cry like this, not for me, not because of something I carried. Charles looked away, his jaw clenched as if ashamed to meet my eyes. I continued softly. The hardest part was that there was no villain to point at, no target to blame, no closure, just loss and silence. The kind of silence that echoes for years. After the memorial briefing, I sat alone in a small storage room. The lights were buzzing overhead. Someone had left ration boxes stacked in the corner. I remember staring at a barcode on one of the boxes because it was easier than admitting that someone whose voice I heard every day was gone. And in that sterile, quiet space, I realized something. I was never going to be able to tell people at home what I carried, not because I did not trust them, but because they deserved a life without the weight of the shadows I walked through. My mother sobbed quietly. "Oh, sweetheart, why did you never tell me any of this?" I turned to her, my voice gentle. "Because, Mom, if I had told you, you would have spent every single night imagining the worst, and I could not do that to you. You had already suffered in your own ways. You did not need my ghosts, too." She reached up, cupping my face in her trembling hands. "You went through all that alone, for years, and you still came home and smiled." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I never knew how strong you were." I looked down, briefly steadying myself. Strength is quieter than people think. Charles finally spoke, his voice low and raw. "Why did you leave the Navy?" he asked, as if the question itself hurt him. Because I could not keep losing people. Not like that. Not silently. And not without being able to tell anyone why my heart felt heavier every year. I left so that what happened to Brenner would not happen again in my hands. Silence filled the cabin again. This time, not with tension, but with the weight of understanding. My mother cried softly, her shoulders shaking. She leaned into me as if trying to shield me from a pain that had already passed but never disappeared. Charles sat motionless. His mouth opened, then closed. He had no insult left, no arrogance, no dismissive remark. Only the realization that he had spent years belittling someone who had carried worlds heavier than anything he had ever known. I looked out the window again at the fighter jet keeping pace beside us. In its reflection, I saw my own face steady, measured whole. And for the first time, Charles saw it too. Charles sat there staring at the floor as if every memory he had ever dismissed were crawling back up through the cracks. The confidence he wore like a tailored suit had slipped off him entirely. What remained was a man confronting the echo of his own words and realizing for the first time how sharp they had been. The fighter jets still flanked us. The engines still hummed with steady, controlled force. But inside the cabin, the sound that mattered most was the quiet unraveling of a man who finally understood the magnitude of what he had done. He rubbed a hand over his face. Years of practiced arrogance had etched deep lines around his mouth, the kind that come from judging more often than listening. I watched him swallow hard, as though trying to force down the weight rising in his throat. 20 years, he whispered. 20 years I have talked about you like you were nothing. My mother looked at him with tired disappointment. She did not say a word. She did not need to. He lifted his eyes, slowly meeting mine, with an expression I had never seen on him. Not anger, not superiority, not irritation, but something closer to a man staring at himself in a mirror and not liking who stared back. "I remember," he said, voice thin, "the first time your mother told me you joined the Navy." He let out a brittle laugh. "I told her some people choose uniforms because they do not know how to choose a life." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "I used to say you enlisted because you had no future, that you joined to escape responsibility." I kept my gaze level. He flinched as if that steadiness was more than he deserved. "I said you were wasting your youth," he continued. "That you were throwing your life away for scraps." His eyes clouded as the memories stacked on one another. "And every time you came home," he whispered, "every single time I asked you when you were going to quit pretending that the Navy meant anything real." I felt my mother stiffen beside me, her hands balled into fists in her lap. She had lived through each of those moments too, quietly, helplessly. Charles's voice dropped even lower. "And you never snapped. You never defended yourself. You just nodded and walked away. I used to think that meant you agreed with me. But now," he shook his head slowly, "now I see that you were protecting yourself from me." "No," I corrected calmly. "I was protecting Mom from your reaction." He froze. The engine hum filled the silence between us. My mother's breath caught, but she did not look away. It was time he saw the full picture. Charles blinked hard, as though processing a truth too large to fit in the space between his ribs. "I was the one who held you back from fighting him," my mother whispered. "I thought I was keeping peace. I did not realize I was letting you carry everything alone." Her voice broke. "I am so sorry, Talia." I placed my hand over hers gently. "You did what you could." And Charles finally understood what neither of us had ever said aloud. He had been the storm we all navigated around. He leaned back slowly, sinking into the leather seat as though the truth had stripped him of all the armor he thought he possessed. He stared out the window at the F-35 gliding in perfect formation and whispered, "I used to think strength was loud, that it meant power money control." His eyes lifted to mine. "But yours is nothing like that. Your strength was invisible to me because I was too busy listening to myself." That was the closest Charles had ever come to confession. And in that moment, he realized something far more painful than the presence of fighter jets. He had spent 20 years dismissing the strongest person in his family. The descent into Tampa Bay felt different from every landing I had ever experienced. The jet sliced through the warm Florida air, smooth and controlled, yet the tension inside the cabin pulsed like a heartbeat. Charles sat stiff and pale, his hands knotted in his lap. My mother stayed close to me, a subtle shift, but powerful enough to redraw the lines of our family without a single word spoken. When the wheels touched down with a soft jolt, I felt the atmosphere change. The cockpit door opened. The pilot's voice held a formality he had not used before. "Ma'am, ground control has been notified of your arrival. Coordination team is already in position. They are awaiting instructions." My mother's brows lifted slightly. Charles blinked hard, as if the words rearranged the world around him in real time. The pilot hesitated, glancing toward me. "I think you should know ma'am people outside they seem to be gathering. Cameras. Personnel." He lowered his voice. "They know someone important is on board." I exhaled, once preparing myself for what protocol routinely demanded, yet what my family had never seen. "Let them follow standard procedure." The engines began winding down as we taxied toward the private terminal. Through the window, the scene unfolded like slow motion. Security vehicles lined the tarmac. 2 Navy sedans idled near the terminal entrance. A clustering of personnel stood in formation. Charles's throat worked up and down. "That cannot be for you. That cannot be real." My mother placed a hand over her chest, breath catching as the jet rolled to a stop. The moment the cabin door opened, warm, Tampa air rushed in, carrying sounds of movement and muted chatter. A metal stairway connected to the aircraft, and I stepped forward first. What happened next shifted something fundamental in every person watching, including the man who had spent 2 decades shaping his identity around the belief that he was the superior figure in our household. As my foot touched the final step, 2 Navy officers standing near the terminal straightened into full salute, their posture rigid, their expressions solemn. The taller of the 2 spoke with command-level projection. "Ma'am, welcome to Tampa. Operational escort has secured the perimeter." I nodded, returning the courtesy without stepping into theatrics. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Stand down to reduced posture." A murmur rippled through the crowd. People craned their necks. Airport staff paused mid-stride. A ground handler holding a maintenance clipboard squinted, then whispered too loudly to contain. Is that Admiral Ghost? The words cut through the air like a spark hitting dry tinder. Conversations halted. Phones lifted. Someone gasped. Admiral Ghost. The one from JSOC. She is real. I thought the code name was Rumor. People began filming rapidly. Others whispered to each other with the energy of witnessed myth. Look at the escorts. Look at the officers. She must be high clearance. Who is she? A man near the entrance shook his head in disbelief. Whoever she is, the military saluting her means she is serious high level, and she looks so normal. Charles stood frozen at the top of the stairs. Then the realization hit the crowd like synchronized recognition. Someone near the front pointed directly at him. That is her stepfather, right? Another voice snapped. He looks like he got dragged here against his will. I heard him yelling at her earlier inside the terminal. A woman folded her arms, disgust rising in her tone. Imagine talking down to someone like that when she is out here saving lives. A man near her huffed. Some people only understand status, not character. Now he is watching the whole world see what she really is. My mother descended the stairs behind me and without hesitation stepped to my side, not to Charles's. A small movement, but symbolic enough to draw attention. Someone whispered sharply. She moved away from him. She chose her daughter. About time. Charles finally stepped down, his face washed out under the Florida sun. Eyes darting from the officers saluting me to the cameras aimed at him. Then came the look, the one that slashed through whatever pride he had left. Judgment from strangers, from witnesses who knew nothing of our history yet understood everything in one lightning moment. A murmur pulsed through the crowd. After everything she has done. And he belittled her. He hid behind wealth while she protected people he will never meet. A security guard leaned toward another, shaking his head. Shameful. Absolutely shameful. You respect people like her. You listen when they speak. Charles flinched as if each whisper were a physical impact. He tried to straighten his back, but his posture wavered. Sweat beaded along his hairline. He looked small in a way that money or age or societal position could not defend him against. The officers approached me. Ma'am, transportation is ready. Tampa Command requests brief confirmation of your status. No obligations, only courtesy. I nodded. Tell them I am off duty and request minimal visibility. Yes, ma'am. They moved efficiently, stepping aside to give me space. Phones continued recording. Someone shouted gently over the hum of voices. Thank you for your service, ma'am. Another chimed in. You are a hero. We appreciate you. I acknowledged them with a measured nod. Service is teamwork, not one person. But Charles could not escape their eyes, not their judgment, and definitely not the contrast between the woman he had mocked and the authority she now commanded effortlessly. A bystander muttered just loud enough, and he talked down to her. He has some nerve. If I were her mother, I would have left him years ago. My mother heard it. She did not shrink. She did not apologize for him. She simply stepped 1 inch closer to me. That 1 inch was the beginning of an earthquake. The terminal manager approached, hesitating only a moment. Ma'am, should we clear the area to give you privacy? Only general clearance. People can stay. They have a right to be here. He nodded. Absolutely, ma'am. Charles whispered hoarsely. Please do something. They are looking at me like I am a monster. My voice stayed calm. They are looking at the truth as they see it. Not my place to change that. My mother faced him fully. For the first time in 20 years, she stood without the quiet hunch of a woman accustomed to shrinking herself. You humiliated yourself, Charles. No one here helped you do it. He recoiled as though struck. Cameras caught that moment too. The image of a man unraveling publicly beside the daughter he once dismissed, and the wife who no longer shielded him from the consequences of his own behavior. A ripple of applause spread softly through the crowd, not for drama, not for spectacle, but for acknowledgement of a woman who had carried her burdens without telling anyone what they cost her. My mother took my arm. I am with you, sweetheart. Wherever you go now, I go too. The sun hit the tarmac, casting long shadows. Mine stretched forward. His shrank behind him. That was the moment the world finally saw him. not as he wanted to be seen, but as he truly was. And that was the moment I realized justice does not always arrive in courtrooms or whispers. Sometimes it arrives on a warm Florida morning when the truth steps into the light and refuses to step back. The VIP room inside Tampa Bay's private terminal was meant to feel luxurious. Soft leather chairs, polished wood, quiet lighting. But the moment the door closed behind us, the room carried the thick air of something far less comfortable. Charles stood near the center, his hands trembling ever so slightly. My mother stayed close to the door as if unsure whether she wanted to sit or flee. I remained standing, letting the silence stretch. Charles broke first. He always did when the world stopped indulging him. "Talia," he started, voice unsteady. "Please, we need to talk. Not like out there, not in front of all those people." My brow lifted. What difference does the audience make? His lips parted, but no sound came out. He pressed a hand to his forehead as if trying to hold himself together. "You cannot let this spread," he finally said. "The story, the footage, the salutes, the fighter jets. My name attached to yours. People will twist it. They will think I have been mistreating someone with government ties. Or worse." He swallowed. "They will think I am the villain." My mother let out a soft, brittle breath. "Think, Charles, not assume, not guess. Think." For a moment, he looked stunned that she had challenged him. But the pressure around him was too heavy for him to lash back. He turned to me, gripping the edge of a chair like he needed an anchor. "Talia, you have to control this. You have to release a statement. Tell them nothing is wrong. Tell them this is normal military procedure. Tell them you do not want attention. Something, anything to calm this down." I watched him carefully. For 2 decades, he had spoken to me like I was a child who knew nothing of the world. Now he spoke like a drowning man begging for a hand. The irony was almost poetic. Charles said evenly, "I have no intention of feeding the media. I have no intention of speaking publicly about what happened." Relief washed over him so suddenly he sagged into the chair. "Thank God. Thank God. I knew you would not want this kind of publicity." I stepped closer. "But let me be clear. I am not protecting you." His head jerked up. "What I did not expose you to anyone. Your actions did that on their own." His expression collapsed, like watching a wall begin to crumble stone by stone. I continued before he could gather his words. "You belittled me on the tarmac. You insulted my service. You treated me like an inconvenience. You walked ahead of my mother as if she were an afterthought. You made a scene at the stairs. You behaved like a man incapable of respect. People saw it. They reacted. I did not have to say a word." My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, tears catching at the corners of her eyes. Charles looked between us, searching for the version of reality where he could regain control, but it was gone. Completely gone. "So you are not going to defend me," he whispered. The shock in his voice might have been pitiable if it came from someone who had ever deserved pity. I met his gaze. "You spent 20 years tearing me down, telling me I was nothing. And when the world did not believe your version of me, you panicked. You want me to hide the truth to keep you comfortable. That is not my job. It never was." He blinked rapidly, breathing uneven. But people out there think I am cruel. They think I abused my own family." His voice trembled on the last word. My mother flinched. I answered calmly. "They think you treated me with disrespect. And they are correct. Disrespect is not a private matter when you choose to perform it publicly." He shook his head violently. "You do not understand. My reputation could be ruined. My business partners could pull back. My name will be dragged through the mud." I lowered my voice just enough to anchor the words. "Your name is not my responsibility." For the first time since I met him, something in his face broke fully. Not cracked. Broke. His voice came out almost childlike. "I never meant for things to look this way. I was just treating you the way I always have." That was the closest thing to honesty he had ever spoken. And the saddest. I nodded. "Exactly. That is why it looked the way it did." His mouth fell open, but no excuses came. No self-righteous justifications. No belittling remarks. His entire script had disintegrated. My mother stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Charles, you did this to yourself. You cannot ask her to fix what you broke." He shook his head, shaking like a man watching the ground disappear. "I did not know," he whispered. "I did not know who she was." I let a long breath out, and somehow that was the problem all along. "You never cared to ask." Silence again, heavy enough to feel like gravity. He looked at me then, not with superiority or entitlement, but with the bewildered pain of someone who had realized too late that the world he controlled was never actually his. "What should I do?" he whispered. I gave him the only answer that was true. "That is for you to figure out, not me." And in that instant, the man who had dominated every conversation, every decision, every room he entered sank into his chair, small lost, stripped of every illusion of power. The confrontation was over, but the consequences had only begun. The door of the VIP room had barely clicked shut behind Charles when my mother exhaled the kind of breath a person carries in their chest for years without realizing it. She stood very still, hands pressed together, her eyes unfocused, as though something inside her was shifting into place piece by piece. I approached her gently. "Mom," she did not turn toward me at first. She stared at the polished floor as if some hidden truth were written there waiting for her to finally read it. Then she whispered almost to herself, 20 years. 20 years. I lived like I was walking on cracked ice, hoping every day it would not break. I felt a tight ache in my chest. She turned to me, eyes shimmering but clearer than I had ever seen them. And today she said I realized the ice was never real. It was just him, the fear he created, a fear I let shape my whole life. For the first time in my adult life, my mother looked her age and her strength at the same time. She straightened her shoulders. "I am done, Talia. I am leaving him." The words did not tremble. They did not crack. They landed with the steady finality of a judge's gavel. I nodded once, not surprised. I had known this moment would come. I had prepared for it. Literally. "Mom, there is something you should know." She blinked at me. "What is it, sweetheart?" I reached into my bag, pulling out a slim folder. Inside were neatly clipped documents, signatures, highlighted sections, and a card with embossed lettering. Her brows furrowed. "What is this?" I handed it to her. "The attorney's name is Lisa Hanover. She is waiting outside the terminal." Mom looked up, stunned. "An attorney? Waiting for me?" I nodded. "After Christmas, I learned something. He had a meeting scheduled with a financial advisor in Miami. He thought I did not know. He was planning to reorganize assets, shift property, move bank accounts." She closed her eyes. He was preparing to cut me off. Yes, and I was not going to let that happen. I tapped the folder gently. "These are temporary protective filings for your assets. He cannot move anything now." She opened the folder with trembling hands. Her voice came out small. "You did this for me." I met her eyes. "You deserved protection long before today. I only made sure you finally got it." She pressed the folder to her chest as if it weighed more emotionally than physically. After several silent seconds, she asked quietly, "How long have you known he was planning this?" "Since December." That was when I saw the statements shifting. And when I heard him speaking on the phone about tightening the household budget, but only the part that applied to you. Her expression hardened, not with shock, but recognition. "He has always prepared the exit before he pushes someone out." "Yes." She shook her head with a bitter smile that was half heartbreak, half relief. And here I thought I was the one clinging to this marriage. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You survived it, Mom. That is something to be proud of. But surviving does not mean you owe him the rest of your life." She let out another long breath. A release. A surrender. A rebirth. Then she looked toward the door of the VIP room, where Charles sat alone on the other side, crumbling under the weight of his own reflection. "What will happen to him?" she asked quietly. "Whatever happens," I said, "is the consequence of his choices. Not yours, not mine. Just his." She nodded slowly, accepting the truth she had avoided for decades. The door opened and a woman in a Navy business suit stepped in. Mid-40s, confident, poised, holding a leather folder. "Ms. Greer," she said, addressing my mother directly. "I am attorney Lisa Hanover. Everything is prepared if you would like to proceed." My mother hesitated only a second. Then she stepped forward. "Yes, let us begin." Lisa guided her to a table near the window. Papers spread out, signatures marked, explanations given. My mother's hand did not shake once. She signed with the calm determination of someone reclaiming a life inch by inch. When it was done, Lisa nodded. "We will file immediately." "Effective today, you are legally protected." My mother looked at me with gratitude so deep it softened every line of her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I squeezed her hand. "This is only the start." The door finally opened again and Charles stepped inside. He froze when he saw the papers. The attorney, the folder, the shift in my mother's posture. His voice cracked. "What is this?" He looked at me first. Betrayal in his eyes. But beneath it, something else, fear. Real fear. My mother answered for herself. "This is my life, Charles, and I am taking it back." He stared at her speechless. Then at me. "You planned this. You set this up behind my back." I met his shock with calm. "I protected my mother, something you should have done long before today." His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be powerless in a room he once controlled. My mother stood, straight, tall, unwavering. "Let us go, Talia." She took my arm, without looking back at him, without apology, without fear. As we left the room, I heard the soft sound of Charles sinking into a chair. Not in anger, not in outrage, in the slow collapse of a man realizing the empire he built on control had finally fallen. 2 weeks passed. 2 quiet weeks where my mother settled into her temporary place in St. Augustine, where she learned the stillness of mornings without fear, where she drank coffee without waiting for footsteps that dictated the mood of the day. Meanwhile, Tampa's legal machinery moved with steady precision. Charles's accounts were frozen, his properties were evaluated, his attorney fees climbed. His business partners began to distance themselves quietly, not out of morality, but out of caution. And through it all, I heard nothing from him, not a message, not a demand, not even a performative apology. I assumed he had finally accepted the consequences of the life he had built. I was wrong. On a gray Thursday morning in Jacksonville, as I returned from a jog along the river, I found him standing on my porch. Not the polished version of himself, not the man in custom suits and expensive shoes. This version looked older, smaller, his shirt wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes frantic. "Talia," he said the moment he saw me, "thank God you are home." I kept my distance. "What do you want, Charles?" He swallowed hard and took a shaky step closer. "I need your help. My attorney said your testimony could change everything." My silence stopped him like a wall. "Testimony for what?" He ran a hand down his face. "They are building a narrative that I used intimidation and financial control against your mother, that I created a hostile environment, that there was emotional harm. That is not who I am." I stared at him. "That is exactly who you are." He flinched but pushed on, desperate. "People are exaggerating. They are twisting things. I never laid a hand on her. You know that. You can attest to that." My voice stayed cold. "The law covers more than physical harm, Charles." Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition he did not want. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a folder, trembling as he offered it to me. "I have to present character statements next week. If you testify that I am not abusive, that I never hurt your mother, they will reduce the settlement." I could keep my business, my reputation. He hesitated. I could survive this. I looked at the folder but did not touch it. "You came here to ask me to save you." He exhaled shakily. "Yes, I am asking. I am begging. You have every right to hate me, but I am drowning Talia. They will take everything. I lost investors, I lost contracts, and your mother froze our joint accounts." He looked at me with a desperate, pleading expression. I need you. My testimony is not going to be the rope you hold on to. He stepped closer. Please, tell them I am not a monster. Tell them I never abused anyone. Tell them I was harsh, sure, but not violent. You can do that. You can save me. I let silence settle between us, thick and unmoving. I watched him, the man who spent 20 years mocking my career choices, my service, my value, the man who belittled my mother into silence, the man who strutted through life believing he could not be touched. Now he stood begging on my porch because the consequences had finally reached him. Charles said slowly, "Do you know what your biggest problem is?" He blinked through desperation. "What you have never once protected anyone. Not my mother, not me, not even yourself. You built your entire world on control, and now that you cannot control the outcome, you want someone you mistreated to rescue you." His mouth trembled. "Talia, please." I shook my head. "I will not testify for you. You never protected anyone. Do not expect someone else to protect you." My words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, his breath catching. He looked at me with heartbreak twisting into disbelief. "You would really let me lose everything?" I corrected him calmly. "You lost everything the moment you chose cruelty over compassion. All this paperwork is just catching up." His face crumpled. His shoulders collapsed. He opened his folder, staring at the useless forms, the character statements, the request for testimony, the hope he had pinned to my compassion. Slowly, he lowered the folder to his side. "I thought you were better than vengeance." I met his broken gaze without flinching. "This is not vengeance, Charles. It is accountability." He looked at me for a long moment, then looked past me as if the world he had built was dissolving in real time. Then, without another word, he turned, walked down the steps, and disappeared into his car. 3 days later, the court finalized the preliminary rulings. The marital assets were divided, his business holdings restricted, his personal accounts drained by penalties and legal fees. He lost nearly everything, and for the first time in 20 years, my mother slept without fear while the man who once controlled her future faced the consequences of his own past. Moving my mother to St. Augustine felt less like a relocation and more like guiding her across a threshold she had never been allowed to step through before. The small cottage we found sat near the marshes where the morning light reflected off the water in soft gold. It was peaceful, honest. Nothing like the cavernous house she had lived in with Charles, where silence felt like a trap rather than rest. The day we unlocked the door, she stood frozen on the front step, eyes filling slowly, as if taking in the idea of safety for the first time. "It is quiet," she whispered. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from wonder. I smiled. "Quiet is good, Mom." She nodded, pressing a hand to her heart. I had forgotten what good quiet feels like. We spent the next week settling her in, unpacking the pieces of her life she had once hidden away, rediscovering hobbies she had abandoned, organizing the kitchen exactly how she liked it rather than how someone else demanded. Every day she seemed to breathe a little deeper. Every day her shoulders lowered an inch from where they had lived for 20 years. Meanwhile, my own life shifted in ways I had not expected. A former colleague from the reserve reached out after hearing that I was back in Florida. They needed a security liaison for crisis readiness training, someone who understood both the communication and operational sides, someone who knew how to navigate systems quietly, someone who could teach without needing praise. It felt right. A job offering structure without the shadows, a place where my experience mattered without consuming me. When I told my mother about the position, she smiled with pride I had never seen directed at me so openly. "That sounds perfect for you," she said. "You can still serve. Just on your terms." I nodded. On my terms mattered more than anything. For the first time since leaving active duty, the ache in my chest felt softer. Not gone, but no longer crushing. Mom settled into a gentle routine. Morning walks along the water, reading on the small porch, planting herbs in the backyard as if reclaiming the years she had lost indoors, shrinking herself to fit someone else's temper. Sometimes she would stop in the middle of a task just to breathe, and when I asked her if she was okay, she would smile quietly. I am learning what peace feels like. Our relationship, too, began to mend, not with dramatic confessionals or emotional fireworks, but in small, consistent ways. Shared coffee in the mornings, late night conversations about nothing and everything. Her asking about my service with genuine curiosity rather than fear. Me allowing her to ask without shutting down. Both of us discovering the woman the other had become while trapped under the weight of Charles's control. One evening, as the sun dipped low, we stood outside watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. She slipped her arm through mine. "I should have left him years ago," she said. I squeezed her hand gently. "You left when you were ready, and you survived until you could." She rested her head lightly on my shoulder. "And I am proud of you, Talia, for everything you have carried, and everything you chose to put down." Something in me settled at those words like a long-held breath released. Healing did not look like triumph or celebration. It looked like two women standing quietly in a warm Florida evening, finally free from the shadows that had shaped too much of their lives. It looked like choosing peace over survival. And for the first time in a long time, both of us felt whole. St. Augustine Lighthouse rose above the shoreline like a quiet sentinel, its black and white stripes cutting against the sky. The wind carried the briny scent of the Atlantic and the rhythmic sound of waves rolling over the sand below. I stood near the railing, watching the water stretch endlessly toward the horizon, feeling the salt air settle on my skin. For the first time in a long time, the world felt still. Not silent in the heavy way that follows loss, but calm in a way that allowed me to breathe without waiting for something to go wrong. I closed my eyes and let the ocean fill the space around me. In that gentle roar, memories surfaced with a clarity I had not expected. Brenner's laugh echoing in a concrete hallway, the weight of radio static during long nights in the Middle East, the faces of men and women who moved through shadows with the kind of trust that can only be formed in places where every decision mattered. I remembered the memorial briefing, the folded flag, the quiet nods from commanders who understood exactly what those moments cost. I remembered the nights afterward when I paced unfamiliar barracks halls, pretending I was fine, because admitting otherwise felt like betraying the image of strength everyone assumed I carried. I opened my eyes again, looking out at the dark blue water. I whispered into the wind, "I hope you all found peace." Saying it did not reopen the wound. Instead, it released something that had lived inside me for too long, a tether I had wrapped around my own heart the day I walked away from active duty. I inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp edge of the wind sweep through me. This place, the lighthouse, the ocean, the open sky, felt like a boundary between what had been and what could be, a place where I could look back without being pulled under. My mother's small cottage sat just beyond the dunes. Earlier that morning, she had stood in the doorway waving a little as I headed out. She looked lighter than I had ever seen her, moving through her life with genuine ease rather than careful calculation. Watching her heal had done something to me too. It reminded me that breaking free was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a life that finally belonged to us. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the Navy Reserve confirming my first day of consulting work. I smiled at the thought of returning on my own terms. No classified shadows, no impossible wait, just guidance, advice, mentorship, turning years of operational experience into something useful and safe, something that built instead of broke. I slipped the phone away and looked back toward the water. The sun hovered above the horizon, and the first streaks of orange glowed across the waves. I felt it then, the quiet shift inside me, a resolve forming without resistance. I would not spend another second letting someone else's authority define my worth. I would not shrink myself to make room for another person's insecurity. I would not live under the weight of silence that did not belong to me. This was my life now, mine to shape, mine to protect, mine to live without apology. The wind lifted a strand of hair across my cheek. I brushed it back and whispered softly, more to myself than to the world. Free. For the first time, free. The lighthouse beam rotated slow and steady, casting arcs of light across the water. A reminder, a guide, a promise. And as I stood there letting the warmth of the rising sun reach me, I realized something simple and true. My past had shaped me, but it no longer owned me. The ocean did not judge. The sky did not confine. The world felt wide open, and for the first time in years, I felt ready to step forward without fear, without hesitation, without chains. I turned toward the path back home. The lighthouse behind me, the ocean at my back, and a future finally within reach. I have learned that a life can be divided into two parts: the story you tell and the story you live in silence. For years, I believed those two versions of myself could never meet. One belonged to the Navy, the missions, the coded messages, the nights spent guiding people whose names would never appear in any book. The other belonged to a fractured home where survival meant staying quiet and letting storms pass without reacting. It took me decades to understand that both forms of silence can carve scars just as deeply as spoken words. I am standing in a calmer season now, but reaching this place required a journey that was anything but simple. And as I look back at all that happened on that flight in Tampa in the months after the moment, my stepfather mocked me, then watched the world bow to a truth he never imagined, I realize the lesson is larger than my own life. It belongs to anyone who has ever been underestimated, ignored, or quietly carrying weight that others do not see. When I was young, I used to think that pain needed to be visible for people to respect it. If someone hurt you, they needed to see the bruise, hear the crack, or face the consequences. But the truth is different. The deepest injuries come from words spoken casually, from dismissal that piles up year after year, from being treated as less simply because you do not fit someone else's vision of who you should be. My stepfather Charles believed strength needed to be loud. He believed status was the same as value. And he believed that a young woman in uniform could not possibly hold the kind of resolve that sits quietly behind the eyes of those who have seen too much. But strength reveals itself differently in every person. For some, it shouts. For others, it whispers. And for many veterans, especially those who served behind closed doors or in roles the public does not understand, strength is a discipline of silence, not weakness, not secrecy out of shame. Silence that protects, silence that preserves, silence that carries stories too heavy for ordinary conversation. Looking back, I wish someone had told me earlier that you cannot expect people who have never walked through fire to understand the heat on your skin. It is not their fault. It is not your burden. But when they choose to judge you based only on what they think they see, that is when injustice begins. What happened on that jet was not about rank or code names or fighter escorts. It was about truth finally stepping into a room where lies had lived comfortably for too long. My stepfather spent 2 decades calling me a disappointment. He told me military service was for people without ambition. He told my mother that I would never become anything meaningful. He believed money granted him wisdom. He believed authority granted him the right to belittle those around him. He believed cruelty was leadership. And then one morning, with the Florida sun lighting the runway, he watched the world react to a truth that could not be denied. He saw the pilot salute me. He heard the call sign Admiral Ghost repeat through secure channels. He heard NORAD request confirmation of my final destination. He saw 2 F-35s align themselves with our jet like silent guardians, and in that moment the story he had told about me collapsed. But here is the part that people often misunderstand. The humiliation he felt that day was not revenge. It was revelation. There is a difference. Revenge is about inflicting pain. Revelation is about confronting truth that was always there, but ignored. For many years, people like my stepfather operate unchecked because silence allows them to continue. But silence from the injured does not mean ignorance. It does not mean weakness. It means they are choosing battles worth fighting. And sometimes the victory comes not from striking back, but from letting a person stand alone in the shadow of their own behavior. When my stepfather realized who I truly was, he did not apologize because he understood my service. He apologized because he recognized his cruelty. That distinction is important. Many Americans, especially those over 50, have lived long enough to understand that regret rarely shows up on time. It arrives the moment you cannot outrun it. Maybe you know someone like Charles. Maybe you were raised by someone like him. Someone who thought control was love. Someone who believed fear was respect. Someone who used silence as a weapon, not a refuge. And maybe, like me, you learned to bend yourself into small shapes to survive the people who were supposed to protect you. If that is part of your story, then hear this. Clearly, family can wound you deeper than war, but healing is possible. Healing begins the moment you understand that someone else's voice does not define your value. Healing begins the moment you give yourself permission to step out of the life they tried to trap you in. Healing begins when you stop excusing cruelty simply because it came wrapped in family ties. During my years working in intelligence operations, I witnessed courage that cannot be measured. It came from people who carried secrets they could never explain. From those who survived loss but still stood their post the next morning. From those who built peace in places that had never known peace. But the greatest courage I ever saw came from ordinary people who walked away from those who hurt them, even when that meant stepping into the unknown alone. That is the kind of courage my mother finally found when she left Charles. And that is the kind of courage many of you watching this have shown or are preparing to show, whether you realize it or not. Justice does not always need to be loud. Sometimes it simply needs to be final. When Charles returned weeks later begging for help, asking me to testify for him to save his reputation, to protect a dignity he had never shown to anyone else, I realized something important. His downfall was not my responsibility. His redemption was not my burden. His pain was not mine to carry, and refusing to save him was not cruelty. It was closure. True justice is not revenge. True justice is choosing yourself after years of being told not to. It is protecting the people who stood by you. It is breaking the cycle so the next generation does not inherit the same wounds. It is standing tall in your truth even when others once tried to bury you under theirs. I do not know what battles you carry. I do not know what family wounds still ache when the room gets quiet. I do not know what story you live behind the polite conversations and the brave smiles. But I do know this: never judge a veteran by what they choose not to say. Never assume silence means emptiness. Never underestimate the strength of someone who survived what others will never know. And never forget that justice sometimes whispers. Sometimes it simply steps aside and lets consequences do their work. My hope is that my story reminds someone out there that freedom, whether emotional, physical, or spiritual, is possible. It may take years to reach it. It may take courage you do not think you have. But the peace waiting on the other side is worth every step. If you are watching this or listening to this and something in your chest feels heavy or familiar, know this truth. You are not alone. You are not weak. You are not invisible. Your silence may have protected others. Now let your strength protect you. And if your story has chapters that still hurt, remember this too. Healing is possible. Justice is real. And your future, even if you cannot see it yet, can be rebuilt one honest breath at a time. There is a moment in every story when the noise finally settles and what remains is the truth you can no longer ignore. For me, that moment came standing on the tarmac in Tampa watching a crowd stare in disbelief as the man who spent 20 years belittling me realized he had never truly known me at all. For some of you, that moment may have arrived quietly in your kitchen one morning. Maybe it showed up at a hospital bedside or during a phone call when a voice you trusted suddenly cut a little too deep. Maybe it came the day you finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in your own life. We all have a moment when someone underestimates us, and the truth rises like a tide that can no longer be held back. And often, that moment is followed by something even heavier, a realization that the people who wounded you the most were sometimes the same people who claimed to love you. If you are over 50, you already know this. Time has a way of revealing the things we once tried so hard not to see. Parents who controlled you instead of raising you. Step-parents who treated you like an inconvenience instead of a child. Siblings who believed their voice mattered more than yours. Partners who mistook silence for obedience instead of exhaustion. And maybe like me, you grew up thinking that if you just tried harder or stayed quieter or made yourself smaller, you could finally earn a kind of peace with them. But peace built on shrinking yourself is not peace. It is survival in slow motion. That is why I want to speak directly to the part of you that still wonders if you were the problem. You were not. You never were. Has anyone in your family ever underestimated you until the truth came out? Has anyone brushed off your achievements because they could not control you? Has anyone mocked the parts of you that were actually your greatest strengths simply because those strengths did not benefit them? If those questions touch something inside you, I want you to take a breath and hold on to this next truth, because it matters more than anything I said in this entire story. You are not alone, not in your hurt, not in your silence, not in the complicated love you carry for people who did not always handle your heart carefully. There are millions of Americans, especially in your generation, who know exactly what it means to carry family wounds that never fully faded. People who were raised to push through pain instead of talking about it. People who grew up being told that respect only moves downward and never upward. People who learned to survive under someone else's rules until the day they finally realized they were allowed to make their own. That is why your voice matters here. Not for me. For you. Comment your city. I want to see how far stories like this travel. I want to know how many of you out there have lived through the same quiet wars behind closed doors. Maybe you are in Detroit or Phoenix or Charlotte. Maybe you are watching from a small town where everybody knows your family history and thinks they know your story. Maybe you are retired military in Texas, or a grandmother in Ohio, or someone sitting alone at a kitchen table in Oregon wondering if the heaviness in your chest is something only you feel. It is not. And if you have ever broken free from a toxic parent or step-parent, if you have ever chosen your own sanity over someone else's approval, if you have ever walked out of a house where love was conditional and came with a list of demands just to breathe for the first time in years, then hear these words spoken with the deepest sincerity. You are not alone. You are part of a quiet army of survivors, people who endured emotional storms that no one else saw, people whose victories did not come with applause but with a steadying breath and the courage to keep going. Some of you still carry the echoes of voices that told you that you were not enough. Some of you still wonder whether the healing you want is allowed. Some of you are still in the middle of choosing yourself after a lifetime of choosing others. And if you are standing at that crossroads right now, unsure whether to take the step that will change everything for you, let this moment be the encouragement you have been waiting for. Your story matters. Your strength matters. Your freedom matters. And yes, your healing matters too. Maybe your Admiral Ghost moment has not happened yet. Maybe the world has not seen what you carry or what you survived. Maybe the people who hurt you still believe they hold power over you. But power rooted in cruelty never lasts. Eventually, it cracks. Eventually, the truth rises. Eventually, something shifts in your heart and you understand that your value was never theirs to measure. So speak to me in the comments, not because I need your words, but because you deserve to hear yourself. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if someone once underestimated you. Tell me if you walked away from a toxic home and found peace later in life. Tell me if you stayed silent for years because no one ever showed you another way. Tell me if this story reminded you of something you once buried. Stories like this travel farther than you think because they carry pieces of so many lives. When you share where you're from, you help someone else feel less invisible. When you admit you broke free, you give someone else permission to do the same. When you whisper, "I've lived," that you help another person realize they are not losing their mind. They are reclaiming it. And if you are still in the middle of your own fight, still deciding whether you deserve better, I am telling you right now with absolute certainty and without hesitation, you do. You deserve respect. You deserve safety. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be loved without conditions. You deserve a life that does not require you to walk on eggshells just to keep the peace. My story is not unique. It is simply one example of what happens when truth finally steps into a room where fear once lived. Yours may look different. It may be quieter. It may be slower. It may involve people who swear they mean well, even as their actions tell a different story. But no matter what shape your struggle takes, there is one thing I want you to walk away with after hearing my voice. You are not alone. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever again in the way you once were. I am here. This community is here. And somewhere, someone is reading your comment and whispering, "I thought I was the only one." If you have ever been underestimated until the truth came out, tell me your city. If you have ever walked away from a toxic parent or step-parent, tell me your story in one sentence. If you have ever chosen healing over fear, tell me with a simple yes. And if right now your voice feels small or uncertain or shaky, just know this. A shaky voice is still a voice. A quiet truth is still truth. And your beginning does not have to look like anyone else's. You have already survived the hardest parts. The rest is choosing yourself again and again until it feels natural. I am rooting for you. We all are.